his associates, targeting women, of course, and young girls, many recruited from our local high schools right here in Palm Beach County. The police did their job. They listened to the survivors. They built a serious case. Then they brought it to then State Attorney Barry Krischer. I call his name because his succeeding prosecutors are not involved. But instead of filing charges, was it overwhelmed by the power, by the wealth? He sent the case to a grand jury where prosecutors shockingly minimized the abuse, limited the witnesses, and treated vulnerable young girls as if they were criminals. And you can read that grand jury testimony yourself. At the urging of Krischer's prosecutors, the grand jury returned just one count against Epstein, and it is jaw-dropping: solicitation of prostitution, punishable by up to 60 days in jail. How crazy and wrong, an abomination, if you ask me. Disappointed and alarmed, Chief Ryder took the case to federal authorities, and what followed was more shock and awe to the justice system. In 2008, as we've heard, Acosta approved a secret, shameful, non-prosecution deal without notifying the survivors, and then sent the case back to Palm Beach County. Epstein was allowed to plead guilty to solicitation of prostitution, solicitation for a minor for prostitution. Really? That was that? And then he got an 18-month sentence, which he served about 13 months, federal immunity from prosecution here in South Florida, immunity for unnamed co-conspirators, and work relief privilege. Listen to this. He had work relief privileges that allowed him to leave the jail each day to continue his systematic sexual exploitation of women and girls. And the most troubling also, a deal was hidden from the public, and the full extent didn't come to light until reporting from the Miami Herald and the Palm Beach Post, who brought the fight to bring the grand jury records into the open. Justice was denied without explanation. And listen, I'm hoping as we move forward, these local prosecutors must be subpoenaed and they must be questioned under oath, because I think they know the secret. So these survivors were abused first by a predator and then failed by a justice system that too often protected wealth and power over vulnerable women and children. And let's be clear, folks, had prosecutors in Florida done their jobs, most likely hundreds of young women might have been spared unimaginable harm. So we're here again. We're going to continue to ask the questions that should have been answered years ago. Why was Jeffrey Epstein, a serial predator who used his wealth and influence to exploit underage girls, given little more than a slap of the wrist? Who else should be held accountable? And what must we continue to do to make sure this never happens again? We owe the survivors and the public the answers and more. And with that, I thank you and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman. We're going to, of course, hear some opening testimony from survivors and advocates who will speak about the failure of our justice system to protect them, others, and certainly to hold Epstein and so many others accountable. They're going to each provide some opening remarks. I do want to introduce them briefly. We're going to hear from Danny Bensky, who is an advocate, dance, teaching artist, choreographer, and Epstein survivor. As an educator of the arts, Danny's advocacy derives from creating a safer world for her students and future generations. She is a public speaker and hopes that by sharing her story, we can get an inside perspective into grooming and how abuse can happen and how systems fail people. Danny was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in 2004 and 2005 when she was just 17 years old and working as a dancer in New York City. She has since spoken out about the government's handling of the case and has pursued legal action. And of course, the amount of courage is incredible. And I want to thank, of course, Danny for being here. We'll also hear from Rosa. Rosa is testifying under her first name and under that name only, just for her own safety. She was recruited in Uzbekistan by a modeling agent, co-conspirator, and brought to the US with promises of a career. She met Jeffrey Epstein in 2009 and was abused over several years. With her immigration status used to keep her from leaving, Rosa is a fighter, a coach, a wife, and a stepmother. And her courage, of course, is immense. And we want to thank Rosa for being here. We're going to hear from Courtney Wild, who was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in Palm Beach beginning at the age of 14. Courtney is a mom, advocate, and survivor. She later brought a lawsuit against the federal government over the non-prosecution agreement that allowed Epstein to avoid federal charges. And she will speak about its lasting impact on survivors. We're also going to hear from Jenna Lisa Jones, who was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in Florida when she was 14 years old. She has spoken publicly about her experience and about her disappointment with the failure to fully release information related to this case. She is a mom, a wife, and a founding survivor of Survivors, Inc. We're going to also hear from Spencer Kuvan, who is an attorney who represented some of the earliest survivors to come forward against Epstein, and he spent years advocating on behalf of victims. He will speak about the failures in the original prosecution and the impact those failures have had on survivors. We'll also hear from Lauren Hirsch, who's a former prosecutor and an advocate working to combat trafficking and exploitation. She will discuss the ongoing efforts by survivors and advocates to seek accountability and justice. We will also hear from Maria Farmer by video, who's the first person to report Jeffrey Epstein's abuse to authorities in 1996. She'll be providing video testimony. Finally, Sky and Amanda Roberts are here. We all, of course, know their incredible courage, and they'll be reading a brief statement as well. We will continue, of course, to honor Virginia's memory, her legacy, and her tireless fight for justice. I want to especially thank the witnesses for being here and for your enormous courage. You are doing, obviously, a service, not just to all of the women and girls that have suffered, but to every single American woman and American girl in this country who need to be believed and who need to know that when they report a horror against them, that their government is going to believe them and is going to stand up for them. And so thank you for your courage today. I now are going to hear a video that Maria Farmer wanted folks to hear about. And so we're going to go ahead and play that. So Ms.
My
Farmer
name is Maria Farmer. I am the whistleblower who reported Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Les Wexner, and others to the FBI 30 years ago in 1996. Today, I apologize for my appearance. I was not well enough to attend this hearing in person and have recently been released from the hospital. That's the result of 30 years of fighting. For 3 decades, I've carried a weight that no survivor should ever have to bear. I reported what I believed were heinous crimes against children, and these individuals responsible were involved in an international pedophile ring. I reported their crimes in real time, and the government continues to ignore me to this day. In 1996, I reported Epstein and his co-conspirators to my local New York City 6th precinct. The commanding officer told me local police could only address the local arson crimes, and he instructed me to immediately report the whole story, spanning several states, to the FBI. He told me that it was vitally important that I tell the whole story to the FBI, which I did. The FBI asked me questions, said they were familiar with some of the perpetrators I identified, and gave me every reason to believe they would respond. That failure, that single moment when law enforcement refused to take action, set off a cascade of injustice and grave repercussions to my sisters, my family, and so many others, and to me personally, including my health and well-being. The FBI's decades of failure and inaction led to countless more girls and young women suffering abuse and trauma that could have been prevented. Individuals like Virginia Giuffre, Anushka DeGiorgio, Shantae Davies, Marika Chartoni, Danny Bensky, Jenna Lisa Jones, Ashley Rubright, and Jennifer Rose, among others. Each survivor represents a life changed forever, suffering that could have been spared if the FBI had done their job in 1996. The failures did not stop there. In 2006, the FBI tracked me down, stating that they searched for me because they knew I had reported Epstein 10 years earlier and no one else had. They urged me to testify in a federal criminal trial against Epstein and his co-conspirators, and they promised that they would get him this time. I trusted them again, relied upon them again, and they betrayed me again. Rather than following through with their promises, the government offered Epstein a sweetheart deal and shielded powerful individuals from accountability. And they persist in granting special treatment to certain people to this day. I have received death threats from Maxwell and her associates, including one instance where they threatened to burn my apartment down. And those threats have not stopped. I have been subjected to more than 3 decades of ongoing harassment, vicious challenges to my truthfulness, and real danger from internet instigators, trolls, and more. Meanwhile, my numerous efforts to obtain my 1996 report from the FBI have been rejected time and again. In 2023, I wrote a letter to the government asking for an investigation of the government's actions or inactions in response to my 1996 report. The Inspector General replied saying they were busy with other things, would get back to me, and they never did. I sent multiple FOIA requests for my FBI report records. In January 2025, in response to my most recent request, the government said that they would get back to me in November of 2027, a delay of 3 years. I finally received a letter saying they looked at my complaint, took some kind of action, and the matter was addressed, but what they did was a secret. With no other choice, I filed an administrative claim against the government and then a lawsuit. Since then, virtually nothing has happened, and I'm left waiting and wondering what is next. With the passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, after years of efforts to get my records, an FD 71 form was released for the first time, confirming just a small part of my 1996 whistleblower report and vindicating some of what I had said for years. However, the full extent of what I told the FBI was not in that document, so the release of the Epstein files provides only partial relief for me. Where is the evidence I provided of my sexual assault and that of my sister Annie? Why won't the FBI release my full report? The failures of those sworn to protect us have overwhelmed me. Doing my civic duty has cost me dearly. The stress of this trauma, the government hiding and refusing to turn over written confirmation of my 96 report, along with the ongoing harassment and death threats, have contributed to me developing serious health issues, including Hodgkin's lymphoma, a brain tumor, and recently Addison's disease. In the last month, I have spent 23 nights in hospitals, including multiple nights in the ICU. Along with my health, it has robbed me of my career. In 1996, I was fresh out of graduate school and living a life that I had always dreamed, creating and selling art in New York City. When I was assaulted, threatened, held captive, my career was halted, and the trajectory of my life was thrown off course. So many others had their dreams shattered by these crimes, and they could have been prevented. Individuals like Virginia Jeffrey, who is the backbone of this case and remains the inspiration behind this fight. She's the reason my sister and I came forward publicly so we could stand together. She faced also relentless attacks to her credibility online, yet she fought. While Virginia may no longer be physically beside us, she's been our shining star and guiding light and remains so today. The rest of humanity owes it to her legacy to continue this quest. We are still walking down the trail that Virginia blazed for us, so let me be direct about what we need. The federal government owes us explanations, accountability for injuries caused, and a promise of systemic change when crimes against children are reported. Accountability should start with the government's acknowledgement and responsibility for their repeated failures to act in response to my 1996 report. The government needs to take responsibility for endangering and injuring girls and young women. The government needs to start telling the truth, face my lawsuit, and be held to account to me and to all others who have been harmed. Had the FBI done their job, 30 years of child sex abuse and trauma could have been avoided. I want my full FBI file including the 96 and 2006 reports, including my art. We also need the FBI and the Department of Justice to fully investigate every lead in this case. We need investigation and prosecution of everyone responsible, both men and women. This includes the officials who enabled the 2008 sweetheart deal, the other perpetrators and the many co-conspirators, and anyone who is currently shielding powerful individuals from justice. No more protection for the guilty. There must be no pardoning or commuting the sentence of Maxwell, who sexually abused me, my minor sister, hurt so many girls and other young women, and personally threatened to kill me, has shown no remorse, and has demonstrated no basis on which to believe she would ever be truthful. As the Epstein case whistleblower, I have waited 3 decades for justice. It's a miracle I'm still fighting, especially considering what the stress of 3 decades of this case has done to my health and well-being. I will keep fighting for justice and transparency, for a better, safer future for the next generation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And obviously, I know we don't often get to hear from Ms. Farmer, and we're just very grateful that she chose to address, obviously, us and the country. I also want to thank her sister, Annie Farmer, who has been an incredible advocate, a survivor, of course, herself, and has really worked to share her sister's story and her own story whenever possible. We're going to hear some opening remarks also from Sky and Amanda Roberts. And so I would ask them to join us here at the podium. And I want to thank them also for their courage and for being here.
Thank you, Representative Garcia and all members here today. We deeply appreciate the opportunity to be here. Obviously wish Virginia was here to do this herself, but I will do my best to keep it together and to get through this. My name is Sky Roberts, and I am the younger brother of Virginia Roberts Giuffre. I'm here today because without Virginia's courage and her story, we would not be having this conversation about accountability. In the summer of 2000, just steps away from this courtroom at Mar-a-Lago, Virginia was recruited by convicted trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell. She was only 16 years old, a child who had just finished 10th grade when she began being trafficked. Before her passing, Virginia gave sworn testimony exposing this for what it truly was: a global sex trafficking operation enabled, protected, and funded by powerful people. For years, survivors have been asked the same question: who were the names? The truth is, many survivors stay silent because many of these individuals still hold power, wealth, and influence in our society. Point blank, period. That is dangerous. No survivor should have to risk their own safety just to be believed. But Virginia, she did it anyway. She stood up when others were afraid, told the truth under oath, and faced people she knew were powerful. Today, we lean on her courage once again, because she believed accountability should reach everyone involved, no matter their status or influence. If Virginia were here today, she would say these words herself. Since she cannot, I will say them for her as her little brother. And with that, I'd like to share Virginia's own words from her sworn deposition dated May 3rd, 2016. They trafficked me to many people. Okay, please name a person that Ghislaine Maxwell directed you to have sex with. Prince Andrew. Okay, who else? As a whole, they both trafficked me to many people. Okay, so can you please tell me when Ghislaine Maxwell asked you to have sex with another person? Glenn Dubin. Who else? Well, Redacted is another one. Ghislaine Maxwell asked you to have sex with Redacted? And Glenn Dubin and Steve Kaufman were, like I said, the first people I was sent to after my training. And where does Alan Dershowitz fit into this group of people? Same. I can't tell you piece by piece by piece who. I know Glenn Dubin was first. Okay. And I know Stephen Kaufman was one of the first that I was sent to. Alan Dershowitz could have been between Glenn and Stephen. This is only a small sample of the thousands of stories that still remain untold. But the question today is no longer whether names exist. The question is, what will Congress and the Department of Justice do about it? Even if only a handful of names are publicly known, will there finally be investigations and accountability? With that, I'd like to turn it over to my wife, Amanda Roberts.
First, I want to thank this committee and Representative Garcia and everyone here who continues to fight with us for accountability, but most importantly, standing with survivors. Virginia's story was harrowing, and as you heard my husband speak, she wasn't afraid to say the names. We are talking about millions of files, sworn testimony, depositions, emails, flight records, bank records, photographs, videos, and evidence collected over decades. Evidence that points to a network, not just to people who trafficked and abused over 1,200 victims, girls, children, women, and boys. Epstein and Maxwell did not act alone, and Palm Beach was the blueprint. It was the center for expansion. So when this Department of Justice says there is nothing to see here, survivors know exactly what that sounds like, a cover-up. Virginia wrote in Nobody's Girl, "Don't be fooled by those in Epstein's circle who said they didn't know what Epstein was doing." That sentence should guide this committee's work. Because I don't recall is not enough. When people like Les Wexner are asked about Epstein's finances and alleged connections to his network, the public deserves real answers and investigations. When Howard Lutnick has given changing accounts about his association with Epstein, that deserves scrutiny, resignations, and investigations. When former Prince Andrew denied knowing Virginia, despite evidence and testimony surrounding that encounter, that deserves scrutiny and investigation. And when Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche met with Ghislaine Maxwell, a convicted sex trafficker accused of perjury, and shortly after was moved to a minimum security prison, that demands answers and investigations. So today we ask for four things. First, Congress must hold this Department of Justice accountable, including contempt proceedings, as the record has shown that this DOJ has violated the law. Second, state investigations must continue and expand in New Mexico, New York, Florida, the Virgin Islands, and everywhere this network operated. Third, this committee must issue further subpoenas and required alleged co-conspirators, enablers, financiers, and witnesses to testify under oath. Fourth, follow the money. Financial records are not secondary. They may be the key to exposing the full network: suspicious payments, shell entities, possible tax violations, money laundering, and transactions connected to trafficking and abuse must be investigated aggressively, because financial crimes can open the door and lead to real prosecutions. And finally, the Epstein and Maxwell investigations must be reopened, not partially, not quietly, but fully. Survivors and the public deserve the truth, and enablers must no longer hide behind wealth, power, or silence. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for those words. We are going to begin and hear some opening statements from our witnesses. So I want to just start by thanking Ms. Wild, who's going to be recognized now for her opening 5-minute statement. Ms. Wild.
Hello, my name's Courtney Wild. When I was 14 years old, I was abused by Jeffrey Epstein. He abused me until I was 17 years old. What happened to me was terrible, but what happened after that by our own government changed my life just as much. I came here today to ask for one simple thing, to make sure this never happens again. I filed a case under the Crime Victims' Rights Act because government secretly made a deal with Jeffrey Epstein. They signed a non-prosecution agreement. They made the deal behind closed doors. They never told me, and they never told any of us. Instead, they sent letters telling me to be patient, even though they knew the case was already over. For years, I believed there was an investigation happening. There wasn't. When I found out the truth, I went to my lawyer, Brad Edwards. He took my case in 2008, and he fought for me against the government for over a decade. We wanted to do the right thing for all victims. Together, we wanted answers to a simple question: how could this happen? We had to fight all the way to the 11th Circuit, which took years to get the emails between the government and Jeffrey's lawyers to help us understand what happened. When we finally got them, they showed something I will never forget. The government wasn't trying to negotiate with Epstein's lawyers. It looked like the government was trying to make him happy. They were trying to make sure that the punishment they were going to give him was okay with him. It seemed like they had forgotten that there were 40 of us kids who had been abused by him. I was so confused because where I come from, if you commit a crime, you go to jail. I have never heard the feds of letting you help them decide which crimes they're going to charge you with, or if you're cool with how long you're going to spend in jail. But I thought, what do I know? Maybe that's how it works for rich guys. That's how it did work for Jeffrey Epstein. Finally, after 10 years of fighting, in 2019, a federal judge finally ruled that my rights and that the rights of other victims were violated by the non-prosecution agreement. But there was nothing that could be done about it. There was no remedy. I just want to say it again. I'm sorry, I have to. The court found that the government violated the law and nothing happened. And that means the law, the Crime Victims' Rights Act, 18 U.S.C. 3771, does not matter. And if the law has no consequences, it doesn't protect anybody. I was lucky to have a lawyer willing to fight for me for almost a decade. A lot of victims won't find that, especially in this case where everybody made us feel like we were crazy. So I'm asking you to fix that. Please fix the Crime Victims' Rights Act so it could actually help victims in the future. I have my own ideas and my lawyers have more ideas, but I really hope that if nothing comes of this, we can finally get the legislation right. There needs to be a clear definition of what it means to meaningfully confer with victims. I'm still not sure what that actually means, but I know it never happened for me. There must be real consequences and penalties in the statute that apply automatically when a court determines that a victim's rights have been violated. The answer after years and years of litigation cannot be nothing happens when you finally win and prove that your rights have been violated. If prosecutors choose to ignore victims, those victims' voices must be put on the record, memorialized, and preserved, especially when a deal is made behind closed doors. There needs to be attorneys' fees provision so victims can find lawyers who will stand up for them. If those changes had existed back then, maybe what had happened to me and so many others would have not happened. My case against the government for violating the rights of at least 40 of us Palm Beach kids was happening from 2008 to 2019. Do you know how many other girls Jeffrey abused in that time period? I bet the FBI knows. But the point is that Epstein continued to abuse other girls in New York, New Mexico, around the world, and even still here in Florida, well, after he was released in 2009, and everybody knew it. There were lawsuits. There were so many new articles. He was a registered sex offender, and still nothing was done by the government. not until 2019 when he was finally arrested. None of those girls should have ever been abused. Jeffrey Epstein should have been in jail. If he had been in jail like any other man who did the same thing as him, he would have been, and there wouldn't have been a single victim after 2009. But he wasn't, and he did. He abused so many girls after 2009 at the same exact time that I was asking the government why he got the deal and why they violated my rights. That is the real injustice here. That is the real thing we need to prevent from ever happening again in this country. I was there for his bail hearing in 2019, and I spoke to the judge right in front of him about how dangerous he was. The bail was denied, and for the first time, I thought we might finally get justice. A month later, he was dead. Once again, the system failed us. Someone let him die in a secure prison, ensuring that he would never be held accountable for what he did to me as a kid. Since then, there have been prosecutions, there have been civil cases, there have been settlements, but none of that changes what was lost, and none of that fixes what was allowed to happen in the first place. We fought for years to get Jeffrey Epstein arrested. We fought to hold people accountable. We did not fight so that this could turn into something political or so that our rights would be violated once again. I lost years of my life fighting this, and so did many others. We did that so the next victim wouldn't have to. So don't let this work be in vain. Make the Crime Victims' Rights Act matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wild. Ms. Jones, you are now recognized for your opening statement.
Ranking member and members of Congress, my name is Jenna Lisa Jones. I was 14 years old when I was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in Palm Beach. It has taken me many years to find my voice. For a long time, I stayed silent because I was afraid and because I did not understand why this happened to me. When I finally came forward, I made a commitment to use my voice responsibly. I'm here today to do exactly that. Last September, I went to Washington, D.C. along the other survivors with a simple request: transparency and accountability. We asked you to help us understand how Jeffrey Epstein was given a non-prosecution agreement, even though the government had evidence that he had sexually abused dozens of children, including me. We asked how he was allowed to leave jail in 2009 and continue harming young girls. We asked for answers that would hold our government accountable for its actions. We still do not have those answers. Instead, what we received caused harm all over again, including too many of our survivor sisters who had never come forward before and who never wanted their names or abuse to become public. The Department of Justice released documents that exposed our names, our social security numbers, and deeply personal information. Survivors' and identities were made public. Husbands learned about their wives' abuse for the first time. Children learned about the abuse of their mothers from reporters, from strangers on the internet, and in some cases, from other kids at school. Some survivors learned that friends had also been abused only because they saw their names in those documents. Others saw the most intimate details of their own trauma publicly exposed. Our privacy was violated. The government promised us over and over again that our information would be protected and properly redacted. Those promises were broken again. We came to you seeking answers for why our rights were violated in 2007. And in the process of asking for those answers, our rights were violated again. I want to believe that each of you in this room is listening because you truly care, not just about us, but about every child in this country who survived sexual abuse. If Congress and the Department of Justice truly want to do right by the survivors, the path forward is not complicated. Acknowledge the failures. When Jeffrey Epstein was set free in 2009, and again when our privacy was shattered earlier this year, take responsibility and provide meaningful remedies to the women who have been harmed over and over again. Please do not force us to relive this through more litigation. Pass a law requiring the Department of Justice to compensate victims for the harm that they had caused by releasing the names and information. That would show that this is truly about helping victims. Second, with respect to our ongoing investigations, please remember this. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. Do not pardon Maxwell. If there are other men who hurt women, hold them accountable, but please leave the survivors alone. If you subpoenaed someone to testify before your committees and she tells you she is a victim, listen to her. Believe her. Respect her trauma. Jeffrey tried to paint his victims as bad guys to avoid responsibility for himself. Please learn and understand that. Sharing our stories should be a choice, the choice I was able to make today. It should never be something survivors are forced to do. The girls who were groomed by Ghislaine Maxwell and abused by Jeffrey Epstein should not be treated like criminals. Please learn the stories of the women who have been harmed before you force them to testify in a room full of strangers about the worst moments of their lives. Jeffrey Epstein destroyed so many of our lives, and Ghislaine Maxwell helped him do it. Do not blame their survivors for the crimes of the abusers. That is not how the story should end. Find a way to bring closure to the story of Jeffrey Epstein, to allow survivors and this country to finally begin to move forward so that one day, and I pray soon, Jeffrey Epstein's name is no longer something we are forced to hear every single day. And my last point, I'm not here today only to talk about the past. I am here for the children who are sitting in the classroom today, children who may be vulnerable, confused, and unsure of what is happening to them. When I was a teenager, I did not have the language to understand what was happening to me. I did not know who to tell. I did not know where to go. Many of us didn't. We were young and we were manipulated. We were left without the tools or the support we needed. That is something Congress can change. Every middle school and high school student in this country should receive education on the signs of sexual abuse and exploitation, what it looks like, how to recognize it, and how to safely report it. Schools should have trained adults, accessible resources so that no child feels as lost or as alone as we did. I have worked with other survivors to start a nonprofit called the Survivors Inc. because not everyone who has been abused has access to strong legal representation, therapy, or support systems. I became a certified life coach. I believe in giving others the support I wish I had. Though the survivors, we were able to provide these services to people who have been abused so they can begin their healing journey too. I'm proud of that work, but individual efforts are not enough. Real change requires leadership at a national level. You have the power to make sure that happens to us does not happen again on this scale. I believe one of the most important places to begin is in our schools. Train teachers, educate students, give children a place to turn when they feel they have nowhere else to go. Together we can do better for the next generation.
Thank you so much, Jones. Ms. Bensky, you are now recognized for your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Danny Bensky. I was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in 2004 and 2005. That was 8 years after Maria Farmer first reported Jeffrey to the FBI. Although discussing my abuse is far from easy, I live with diagnosed PTSD from that experience. My story is actually one of the safest stories to tell. The key abuser who caused me physical harm is dead. It's imperative to understand that the stories you are hearing today are a tiny fraction of the whole. I am one of more than 1,200 girls and women. I don't face the same level of threats of defamation lawsuits and serious risks to my safety as some of my survivor sisters do. While there are co-conspirators who do need to be held accountable for the parts that they played in the operation of my own abuse. I was trafficked only to Jeffrey, which really, unfortunately, is not the case for so many others. I was groomed prior to meeting Jeffrey. I grew up in the dance world where perfectionism, body image issues ran rampant in a world that was built on hierarchy and secrecy. I would have my body criticized, critiqued, and manipulated, not so different from what I initially experienced with Jeffrey. I was trafficked to Jeffrey. I had 2 recruiters. One was a late teen, and the other was only 15 years old, just trying to escape her own abuse. Jeffrey weaponized my aspirations and dreams by speaking the language of dance and making false promises. My mom had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. I had seen the name Epstein listed on a donor wall and believed that his wealth and power had come from the medical profession. I brought him her scans, hoping to understand her diagnosis. Instead of helping her, he used my mother's brain scans over me, giving me an ultimatum: either recruit more girls or do more for him. I didn't end up recruiting anyone and instead just endured the abuse. In May of 2005, my mother had a successful operation at Mount Sinai to remove the tumor, and I finally extricated myself from Jeffrey's web. The Epstein case demonstrates that institutional systems have failed survivors time and time again. I was first subpoenaed in 2008 for an interview. I was just 20 years old, and without a victim's rights advocate or a lawyer, I didn't know that I was entitled to those protections. No one told me I was safe. And for many parts of my interview, it felt like an interrogation. Jeffrey had already threatened my friend, and he had told me that I would be charged with prostitution if I ever interacted with law enforcement. He made it clear that he held the cards. The passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act was a moment in which survivors hoped and believed that we might see some reckoning. But the system yet again failed survivors. Before the first document dump by the DOJ, my lawyer teamed up with another law firm representing survivors. Together, they submitted 350 victims' names to the DOJ as names that needed to be redacted prior to the deadline on December 19th. In the first round of documents, I saw my name in 2 places. Then in the January dump, there were more, and the redactions were far, far worse. These files displayed my name, my phone number, my old address, where I worked at the time, where I was studying, and other identifying information. What's important to understand is that these documents weren't just somehow overlooked and not redacted at all. On one document, my nickname, Danny, redacted, while Danielle Hannah Bensky is left completely unredacted. I am just one of the hundreds of survivors exposed like this. A few weeks ago, a legal analyst reached out to share that yet again, my name appeared in a 3rd batch of only 20 documents. After my lawyer continued to contact the DOJ on multiple occasions for protection, my name and information remained attached. These documents hold disturbing and yet incomplete accounts of my abuse, and they were viewable not only by the entire world, but my child, my students' parents, my friends, my employers, my colleagues, my family. I am public. However, in my FBI 302, a Jane Doe who has never, ever wanted to be revealed was exposed. This outing of survivor names does real irrevocable damage. The passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act was meant to be a moment when survivors could regain their power and finally obtain the truth. It was a time for our institutions created to protect the American people to, for once, stand on the side of survivors. As survivors, we have said time and time again, this is not political. This requires coming together and prioritizing coming together, not political showmanship. I'm always asked, what does accountability look like? Accountability means removing perpetrators from power, seeing arrests be made, and legislators pass laws like protecting victims' rights, like Virginia's law, which would remove the statute of limitations for victims' civil claims against their abusers. Our entrenched systemic failures have allowed powerful people like Jeffrey to thrive. When institutions prioritize protecting the powerful and their enablers over protecting victims, abuse becomes normalized. If we continue down this path, the question isn't whether abuse will happen again, but who will be the next Jeffrey Epstein. This moment is critical. It is time to reform our system to protect our survivors, not the perpetrators, and to ensure the truth can come to light. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Ms. Rosa, you are now recognized for your opening statement.
In 2008, I just turned 18 when I met MC Square Model Management owner named Jean-Luc Brunel. Coming from a financial and stable background, I was a perfect target for coercion. I was promised modeling career beyond my dreams. In less than 6 months, MC Squared obtained an O1 visa for me, a feat nearly impossible for a teenager with almost no experience. I did not have the documentation to earn that visa. By May of 2009, I was in New York City. I was isolated, controlled in a manner I've never experienced before. Within 3 months, the agency claimed I owed them over $10,000. I had no family, no friends, or no money. MC Square controlled every aspect of my life, where I went, how I dressed, and how I looked. They provided me enough of allowance to keep me afloat, but never enough to be independent. Less than a month after I arrived to the United States, my agency sent me to a home of a registered sex offender. I was introduced to his girlfriend under the disguise that she was a photographer who helped me build my portfolio. Now I know that Jeffrey Epstein was supposed to be in jail cell in June of 2008. I met him at his house right here in West Palm Beach. He was not in a jail. Jean-Luc Brunel brought me to West Palm Beach to have dinner with Epstein in July. Epstein used the names of powerful politicians to demonstrate his influence. He told me he's an investor of the very agency that promised me a career. He also spoke of his arrest that it was a game, bragging about girls visiting his cell, and his friendships with authorities. Jeffrey offered me a position at the Florida Science Foundation to handle phone calls to help me with my financial troubles. One day, his masseuse called me into his room where I was molested for the first time by Jeffrey. For the following 3 years, I was subject to ongoing rape. Jeffrey Epstein was under house arrest for the molestation of underage girls at the exact time he was abusing me. Seeing that the fact that he could commit those acts made justice feel impossible to me, and it took my ability to seek for help. I was summoned to his residence right here in West Palm Beach. My agency relocated me to Miami to keep me closer, and only after he was released from the house arrest, I was allowed to go back to New York City, where my nightmares continued. Those years of abuse turned into a decade of fear that I still carry today. I eventually found the courage to reach out for help. I stepped forward along other survivors, hoping those who allowed this to happen will be held accountable. I kept my identity protected as Jane Doe. I woke up one day with my name mentioned over 500 times While the rich and powerful remained protected by reduction, my name was exposed to the world. Now reporters from across the globe contact me. I cannot live without looking over my shoulder. I can only imagine the long-term impact this mistake will have on my life. I wanted to be a doctor when I was a kid. So I want to end this statement with a story. In 1800, the doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis discovered something life-saving. He realized that the doctors who were performing autopsies and then immediately delivering babies without washing their hand were carrying cadaverous particles, causing women die in agony. He had evidence, he had solution. He begged the medical establishment to wash their hands to save lives. But the doctors were offended. They found it easier to protect their own reputation and maintain the status quo than to admit they were the ones causing harms. They chose their pride over the life of women, and Dr. Semmelweis was ignored, ridiculed, and eventually cast out. I see the same patterns happening today with handling of these files. Releasing my name while redacting the name of other powerful is not a mistake, it's a choice. It's a choice to prioritize the comfort of an institution over the safety of the survivors. The evidence is right here, yet those in power rather us die socially, emotionally, and physically, than admit their own complicity. I am no longer a Jane Doe hiding in the files. I'm a woman, I'm a fighter, and I'm a witness, and I'm begging you, please wash your hands.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. Obviously, I think one of the true horrors of this investigation has been the way so many survivors continue to be traumatized. And I think this is one just really horrific example of how, even through the Transparency Act, so much horror and re-traumatization continues to happen. So thank you for the testimony. Mr. Kuvan, I'm going to recognize you for your opening statement.
Thank you. Truly moved by her strength. Ranking member, members of Congress. My name is Spencer Kuvan. I've represented numerous survivors of sexual exploitation and trafficking over the years, including the first victim to come forward in the Epstein investigation here in Palm Beach. I'm here today because what happened during the prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein was not simply a failure of judgment. It was a systemic failure of justice. In Palm Beach County, credible evidence of widespread sexual abuse involving minors was presented to state prosecutors, including my client. Law enforcement initially identified dozens of victims. The conduct was organized, repeated, and devastating. Yet instead of a prosecution that matched the scale of the harm, what followed was a secret agreement, as we know, that minimized the abuse and insulted the children that had been abused. Despite the efforts of some of the federal agents at the time, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District decided to have these secret meetings with Epstein's attorneys. The U.S. Department of Justice, in conjunction with the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office at the time, colluded in secret to quietly shelve this case with minimal state charges that branded a 15 and 16-year-old child victim as prostitutes. They gave a sweetheart deal to Jeffrey Epstein and 4 named as well as unnamed co-conspirators. The Southern District U.S. Attorney at the time, Alex Acosta, spearheaded what every attorney advocate saw as the worst non-prosecution agreement ever executed by a U.S. attorney. This sent a message. It told victims that even when the evidence is strong, accountability is negotiable if you are rich and powerful. This awful non-prosecution agreement completely shut down further federal charges for the events they were investigating here in Florida. As I mentioned, that tragic deal was negotiated and signed in secret. Not only was it kept secret from the world, it was kept secret from me. Calls were made repeatedly to the U.S. attorneys investigating this at the time by myself, an advocate for multiple victims at the time. And of course, it was kept secret from those victims. I was forced to file motions with the court to compel its ultimate disclosure, even after it had been executed. And finally, after obtaining court orders, they turned it over to us. A full year after it had been signed. The victims were not consulted. Their advocates like me were not consulted. Victims were never given an opportunity to be heard. This was not just a moral failure. We believed it was a violation of law under the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Originally passed in 2004, subsequently amended by Congress in 06, 08, and 15. Victims have had the right to confer with prosecutors and the right to be treated with fairness and respect. Yet those rights were ignored at the very moment that it mattered most, when decisions were being made that would determine whether justice would ever be pursued. The result was predictable. Survivors, as you've heard, were re-traumatized, not only by the abuse they endured, but by a system that excluded them from the process designed specifically to protect them. And the public was left questioning whether justice can be trusted when powerful interests are involved. This failure by the Department of Justice at the time was a subject of litigation brought, as you heard, by Ms. Wild. That case ultimately exposed a gap in the law, one that must be closed by you. Today, I want to offer that clear path forward. First, Congress should amend the Crime Victims' Rights Act to make it explicit that victims must be notified and given a meaningful opportunity to confer before any non-prosecution agreement or deferred prosecution agreement is finalized. Second, as you've heard, there must be enforceable remedies, not just suggestions. Victims should have standing to challenge agreements reached in violation of the Act, and courts must have the authority to review and, where appropriate, void those agreements. Third, transparency must be the rule, not the exception. Secret agreements that extinguish criminal liability, particularly in cases involving multiple victims, should not exist in our system of justice. And finally, there must be accountability. When prosecutors fail to uphold victims' rights, there must be consequences sufficient to ensure that those failures are not repeated. This is not about relitigating the past. It's about ensuring what happened here never happens again. The survivors in this case have showed extraordinary courage coming here today. They told the truth and they trusted the system, and the system failed them. Congress now has the opportunity, and I would suggest the responsibility, to fix it. Thank you. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go to Ms. Hirsch, please, who's now recognized for her opening statement.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member, members of Congress. I'm Lauren Hirsch, the CEO of World Without Exploitation, the largest anti-trafficking coalition in the country. We have nearly 200 member organizations across the country. Many of those organizations are survivor-led. It is an absolute honor to sit beside each one of you. You are the reason this moment of reckoning is happening. What we have witnessed in the handling of the Epstein case is not simply a bureaucratic misstep. It is a deeply horrific failure to protect the very people the system is meant to serve. Survivors have repeatedly been promised dignity, confidentiality, and care. And instead, we have seen a systemic breakdown in their protection at nearly every step of the way. We have watched those with power and privilege manipulate the system, shielding themselves from accountability, while survivors have suffered in silence. Every one of these failures sends a devastating message, not only to Epstein survivors, but to survivors everywhere, that accountability is optional for the powerful. Survivors have had enough, and frankly, the American public has had enough of this too. We are now in a moment of reckoning that requires a thorough examination of all of the things that have gone horribly wrong, but it also requires a serious course correction. Survivors have been repeatedly harmed, first by Epstein and his associates, and then by law enforcement who refused to bring adequate cases, who didn't notify victims when secret sweetheart deals were made, who allowed abuse to continue even after pleas were entered in. And then they were again abused by the DOJ. When the federal government fails to provide protection under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, survivors cannot be left without remedy. We need a legislative fix immediately to provide compensation and recourse for violations of the Crime Victims' Rights Act. And this is urgent. I think everyone in the room has heard the survivors and understands the profound harm caused by the DOJ in releasing hundreds of names of survivors and their personal information in the aftermath of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. So I'll keep this part brief. As a former prosecutor, I understand that mistakes happen. We're human. But when hundreds of names are released repeatedly, including nude photos of a survivor, this can no longer be dismissed as human error. Something has gone horribly wrong inside the DOJ, and the American public deserves clear answers about how this failure has occurred. This requires a recorded deposition of Pam Bondi on May 29th, not a transcribed interview. Survivors also deserve meaningful legislative recourse, including a private right of action, so that they can be compensated for the exposure of their private information to the public. Accountability cannot end with an examination of process failures or even legislative fixes. These files demand further examination. Assertions that there are no credible investigative leads are deeply concerning. From my perspective, both as the CEO of World We and a former prosecutor, that conclusion is not only premature, it is inconsistent with the available record. There is an abundance of potential investigative leads that warrant serious independent review. For 3 decades, countless men operated with complete impunity. Sex trafficking does not happen in a vacuum. It is driven by the demand for commercial sex, and it is enabled by systems and people who are willing to look the other way. That is exactly what we're looking at here. Likely the largest sex trafficking operation the United States has ever seen. The files are clear, and the files name names. When individuals and institutions surface repeatedly in the files, it's a pretty strong indicator that there's some there. When there are millions and millions of dollars flowing between an individual and Epstein, and there doesn't seem to be a business relationship, but instead allegations of sexual abuse, that's not noise to ignore. That is an investigative lead. And this is just one of many examples. And the examples are not just limited to individuals. Major hospitals took money from Epstein and provided questionable care. And that's putting it nicely. Hospital systems, academic institutions, modeling agencies, and the list goes on. They all require careful, independent examination of investigative leads. The burden should not fall on the survivors to name names or drive investigations. Survivors should be given safe, voluntary spaces to speak, but they should not be compelled. The responsibility lies with investigative bodies, prosecutors, the DOJ, on relevant authorities to do their jobs thoroughly, transparently, and with integrity. Survivors have already carried far too much of the burden. They should not have to carry the failures of our institutions as well. What is needed now is not defensiveness, but accountability. And finally, for survivors and for World Without Exploitation, this is not and has never been political. I'm sure that it will be twisted into us entering the political fray by being here today. But we have been absolutely clear. We will and have worked with anyone who is serious about getting to the truth. The era of silence and inaction must end here. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, just thank you to all of our witnesses for those opening statements. We're going to be moving on to questions and some comments from the members of this committee. I do want to uplift and recognize particularly the survivors and your courage again and how we got to this moment. I want to start just by, again, just commenting that we're here because of the horrific crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and numerous others, and the failure caused by our own government. And I want to, in my line of questioning, I just want to hone down on one thing, which I think is really important. Last July, the administration's FBI and DOJ released a 2-page document saying, and I quote, "We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties." In other words, the current administration, through its DOJ, believed that this investigation was over, that no one else could be investigated for perhaps the worst sex trafficking ring in American history, that no other person could be held accountable, or there could be further convictions of the horrors made and against 1,200 women and girls. Now, we here and some of our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle have worked together to file motions, to file laws, and to push this investigation forward. And I want to be very clear. The DOJ, this administration, the president and the attorney general made it clear that this investigation, in their opinion, was a hoax, was a lie, and there was nothing else to do to move forward. The DOJ tried to close this case. Through our investigation, we have learned that many of the witnesses that we have been going through deposition, through transcribed interviews, were never questioned by law enforcement. And this is something that we learned only by forcing these interviews and by sitting asking these questions. How could Les Wexner have never been interviewed by our own government, who was the source of most of Jeffrey Epstein's wealth and was never questioned? How can some of the folks on this document the FBI had in their possession not ever have been questioned by our own government or law enforcement? How could Darren Indyke and Richard Kahn, who you can see in this chart and were essentially the brain trust of Jeffrey Epstein's organization, how could they never have been questioned? That is not a mistake. That is a cover-up. And what I think we want to make very clear is this is not just about the mistakes and the ongoing harm of the Trump administration. This has been harm posed by numerous administrations led by both Republicans and Democrats. And when folks come and ask, well, why wasn't the former administration, Attorney General Garlick, more engaged on this issue? I ask the same question. Why wasn't